Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Barbara O'Reilly. I'm president of the AFP DC chapter, and it is my honor to welcome you to our webinar this afternoon, answering your FAQs, hiring and job seeking during the COVID-19 pandemic. That is hosted and produced by our dear chapter partners, Campbell Company. The Campbell and Company have been chapter partners and supporters of the DC chapter for many years, and so we are really, truly grateful to have this opportunity to learn from them and their depth of experience in searches and managing and working with clients during all different times, good times and bad, but certainly in this moment, helping clients to think about their hiring and their search practices during a pretty uncertain time. As I mentioned, I am the president this year, and Campbell is one of several other chapter partners that we have. You know, member dues really only cover a portion of what it actually takes to run the largest chapter, AFP chapter in the U.S. And so we are incredibly appreciative to have philanthropic support from all of these partners here listed: ASA Research Foundation, Boodle AI, Campbell, as I've mentioned, CCS Fundraising, DRI, Hilt, Hazen Inc., Impact Communications, MarketSmart, ProList, Pursuant, Schultz & Williams, and Vivo. So really, this is truly a team effort, and we are so proud to call these our chapter partners. Leading a chapter during a pandemic is definitely an interesting experience, but I am really so grateful to have an incredible board to be collaborating and partnering with during these uncertain times. These are our executive committee, our officers who are leading all different aspects of our board, including our bridge, as co-chair of our bridge conference and National Philanthropy Day. And the next slide shows the rest of our board members who are sharing their time, talent, and their treasure in many different ways to manage and lead us through the chapter, through this year and certainly into the next. A little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our two presenters. You are all going to be muted right now, but we encourage you to type in questions or comments that you have into the chat box. We will have time at the end for Q&As, so you're welcome to type things in as you are hearing or as they're sort of occurring to you. And if you have any technical issues or questions, again, type them into the chat box. The terrific Campbell team are monitoring that and will be able to assist. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our two presenters. Chris McFeely has been with Campbell for more than 18 years, and she has been part of the executive search team, working with really talented individuals and incredible nonprofits and finding the right matches between the skills and the missions for those clients. And Marion DeBerry has also been for many years been in executive search and hiring, and has been with Campbell for 35 years, and including 20 of those as in executive search. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to Chris and to Marion to lead us through some tips on how to conduct a search during this pandemic. So Chris, Marion, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Barbara. We're so pleased to be here. Thank you to everyone at the AFP DC chapter. We hope that you'll find this informative, and of course, please send in any questions that you have, like Barbara said. And Marion and I are pretty conversational. We've worked together for a really long time, and so hopefully it'll spark some thoughts that you have, and we would love to include you in the conversation. So we can go to the agenda and just quickly cover, it's pretty straightforward. We'd like to talk a little bit at the beginning about what we're hearing and seeing in the nonprofit sector, as well as with our clients and with our fundraising clients throughout the country. And then we'll move into job seeking during the pandemic, hiring, how to manage your team, and talk a little bit about virtual onboarding as well. before we go into the audience Q&A section of the webinar.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here today. I think I got a little bit too much credit in the bios. That I've been with Campbell Company for 35 years. That would have been practically since the beginning. I guess I've actually only been there since 2006, which is less than half that time. But as Chris said, we are conversational. We look forward to having this conversation. One of the things we should probably say right out of the gate, though, is anything that we tell you could absolutely change tomorrow. There are some things that probably are constant, but this is still unfolding, as all of you know and are experiencing first time. But one of the things that has emerged from this is that people who are willing to embrace their leadership even more critically than they ever have will probably come out of this better than others. This is not a time to be wishy-washy. Even if you believe that you're making a mistake, it's a time to really be definite in what you think that you're doing. Remote work, well, we'll say it's the norm. We'll also say and admit that we all have Zoom and go-to-meeting fatigue, and we'll just acknowledge that this is the way our life will be. And so we have to think about ways to get around that. Probably listening to great music while we're trying to work. But there are resource issues around that because, for instance, I'm doing some work for a school and some people at the school are not able to even access Zoom, and those things are probably part of your reality too with the organizations that you're working with. We are seeing nonprofit teams really being reduced to what is essential. What's interesting about that is that the essential seems to be made in the short term and in the immediate, which we respect and understand. But if we take a longer term view on what this all means, the great organizations, the good ones, the ones that will come out on the other side of this, we believe, are the ones that start to plan for what the future may look like right now. Great talent will always be needed. We're seeing an uptick in people who are interested in having conversations about what the market might look like if they come into it. I think in some ways it's going to be a bit of a buyer's market going forward. I think there will be a lot of people who will be forced into looking for new opportunities. At the same time, organizations will have to be thoughtful about what those new organizations will look like, and I think there will be some opportunities for you to look inside your organization to see who might be there who really could fit what you're looking for. Overall, high-level searches are continuing. And I say overall because I think there tends to be larger organizations who feel that they can take the risk of hiring somebody. Smaller organizations may be a bit more impacted and maybe waiting just a little bit longer. But there are some benefits that have come out of the CARES, the Paycheck Protection Program that nonprofits are exercising, and that certainly is a help for people. So it's a very mixed market. If we look at it by sector, we would say there are certainly definite needs in human services. If we look at it by size, the larger organizations are a little more comfortable taking risks. We look at it by sector. Human services, arts and culture, for instance, are being incredibly impacted. I think that covers the big trends that we're seeing. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Mary. So now we're going to move into a little bit of talking about talent management and retention. And excuse me, I'm so sorry. As Marian said, we've seen an uptick in people who are willing to have some conversations with us and maybe explore some opportunities if there's uncertainty with their current organization. And so it's a good time to think about retention strategies and how you can keep your team inspired and engaged throughout this crisis, and making sure that they're not, it's a balance between having folks really perform well and also just getting through this really hard time. I mean, there's so many things happening, and so really allowing your team to talk about the struggles that they're having with working from home, and that they have parents that they're taking care of, or children that they now have to do e-learning with. There's a lot of factors coming into play. And so really taking good care of your staff and your team is paramount right now. And managing, you know, the folks that you have, communication is always critically important. But at this point, you know, we think of this and sort of over communicate with your team, not to the point where they're exhausted, but to the point where they really feel as though they're still connected as a team and as individuals to their manager. And so some things we're seeing are just some, you know, sort of pop-up team huddles where folks want to either jump on the phone or jump on a Zoom call. We've had virtual water coolers, happy hours, but as Marianne mentioned before, also keeping in mind the Zoom fatigue, because I spent 6.5 hours yesterday, all back-to-back Zoom calls, and I did not want to talk last night at all. It was just, I got to be quiet, because it does take a different level of energy to be engaged in the Zoom call. You know, I think as managers, being more transparent about anything you can be about the, you know, having a set strategy, and sometimes that strategy is, I just don't know where this is going to go, but here's what we're going to try, and really engaging folks. I mean, it's a time to think creatively and encourage that type of engagement with your staff. It also helps to, you know, be creative, innovative, inspiring them. Obviously, teams are motivated by the mission of the organization, but you also want to motivate them individually. We're seeing some organizations continue with performance evaluations. This is springtime and summer sometimes are common seasons for performance evaluations, but some organizations have decided to wait on that. And it really, you have to do what works for your team and for your organization. But it is a good time to set some measurements or some goals to work on some things that you've been meaning to work on, whether it's actual skills and abilities, or maybe it's projects that you want to get done if you're not as busy as you were previously. And so really keeping that team engaged until a time when we can go back to the office, which, like Marian said at the beginning, is changing. You know, we are starting to reopen. I think that's also pretty anxiety producing for most people. What does that look like? How do you reopen and go back to the office when you have children at home who still have to have help logging into second grade? Things like that are the reality for folks, and really thinking carefully and thoughtfully about a plan to reopen your office. How do you social distance? How do you open the doors without touching everything too much? So all of these little things start to become on people's minds. And so taking care of as much of that as you can so that they can focus on getting their work done, knowing that their health and safety, both physically and mental health, you know, is important and being cared for. And we do expect, you know, sometime probably late summer into the fall, hopefully, if everything goes best laid plans, that we will see an uptick in a lot of hiring. You know, whether it's organizations who had to lay people off, those positions are necessary again. If we can go forward with events, if there's a lot more, you know, in-person meetings that can happen, all of those different things will start to reemerge at some point. And so we expect to see and hope to see organizations be in a position to add to their team again.
I'd like to just add to what Chris has said by saying that those of you who have the experience of having worked from home and being remote, help to teach us, the rest of us, to adjust. Chris, I think you have the employer side.
Oh, you're right, I do. Thanks, Marian. And so how do you go about hiring and job seeking during the pandemic? And the way that we broke this down is I'll talk about from the employer side and the hiring manager, and Marian will talk about it from the candidate or job seeker side. And so what we're really encouraging our clients and our not even our clients, but the folks that we've talked to who are looking to hire right now is to really think ahead, which is kind of scary when we're all saying, well, we don't know what next week will be. So there's a lot of gray area, a lot of ambiguity, but trying to envision the future and what it will look like, what you hope it will look like, and to hire towards that goal is really important. And when you start thinking about it that way, you start to see different candidates emerge that could be really additive to your team. And so we always encourage sort of, really thinking ahead and long term, and balancing what you need now with what you will need once we come through on the other side of this. With candidates, when you're speaking to them, please be as transparent as possible so that they can really assess what type of situation they're walking into. And it'll allow them to know whether or not their strengths play to that type of role, and so that they can be really successful. And I think really understanding the challenges and opportunities will help you, obviously, ensure a more successful hire. We are seeing a lot of position descriptions actually address remote talent more and more often, where it's stated in the job description, this is a remote position, ideal, areas are these geographic locations, but you can do this job from anywhere. And that is a way that you can broaden your pool if you need to. And it may not be a permanent situation. It could be shorter term. And people may not want to move right now and relocate, but they may be willing to do that in 3 to 6 months when we know a little bit more about what's happening. And considering the position profiles, the real job, I think that goes hand in hand with sort of envisioning the future and what does this look like? What are they really going to be doing? What are the immediate needs that they need to take care of right now? And of course, always look internally first. Think about the talent that you have. Think about potential that you have on your team, and strive to engage those folks and develop them so that they can take on more responsibility within your team.
So I read an interesting article a few days ago that said to expect job postings to go down. And the reason for that is because there will be so much demand, organizations will be flooded with applications and they'll have to close them almost immediately. But the way around that, as I understand it, is set up a feed so that you always know and follow the organization that interests you. So your job focus will have to get even more laser focused than it has been. I don't know if it will actually turn out that way. So far, we're still seeing things come online. We're still seeing postings. We're still using them. But that is one to think about. That if you have that many more applications and people who are looking for opportunities, one way around is, of course, use your network, and the other is follow the organization so that you will see an opportunity as it comes up, because it will probably be on their careers page. But either way, and this, those of you who lived through the 2009-10 recession will know you're going to be expected to do things that were beyond what you thought you could do excuse me, under normal circumstances, and that will continue. We are looking for patience, but I think patience is something overall. Searches are taking longer. Opportunities are taking longer to fill, simply because, again, organizations are trying to navigate what they need now versus what they need later, versus the kind of team that they'll have and what they need. So look for that and understand that the competition really will increase. And this is where we make our plug to say, one of the ways that you stand out is to make sure that your resume really reflects what you've done versus what you were responsible for. What you were responsible for is the laundry list. The organization is not as interested in that. What they're interested in knowing is, why is that organization better as a result of your having been there? And I think that's something that you're going to have to keep in mind all the way through the process. For those of you who do have strong talents around certain sectors, such as human services and arts and culture, which are really going to need you right now, this is a great time to think about that. Think about that sector differently, because they are going to have strong needs. That's not to say that everyone isn't. All of them: education, healthcare, independent schools, conservation. They're all going to have strong needs. But if we look at where the hurt has really been critically, it's been in those two areas. So with that in mind, if we could have the next slide, and how we think about interviews.
So we've had a lot of conversation. Well, we talk about interviews all the time because that's what we do. But in the recent weeks, that we've really ramped up the conversation because we are trying to guide our clients and our candidates through processes where they're not meeting in person. Or maybe they met one person in person at the beginning of the process because it was before social distancing and recommendations and lockdowns, but they had to go through the end of the process without actually meeting folks in person. And so we recommend, of course, planning for the full process to happen as if you have the ability to do this in person, including as much site visit information that you can provide, and making the candidate experience as the best that you can, and acknowledging the fact that it's not going to be the same as if you were in person in some ways, but there may be parts that could even be more convenient for folks. But you want to keep a lot of that in mind, and then have a plan B and maybe a plan C, depending on what happens with reopening, what candidates ask for. You want to keep in mind what's important to them and what they like to know and who they would like to meet. And so you may need to adjust your process along the way. Obviously, everyone's using video. Clearly, making sure that technology is set up and candidates are able to connect so that they're able to have the best experience that they can once they are connected on the video. There's nothing worse than trying to connect and being unable to get on that Zoom, and it can kind of throw people sometimes. This isn't a test to see how calm are you after your Zoom doesn't connect, because we want to really see how this works. That we don't. We want to make this as simple as possible so people can be in the best possible position they are during the conversations always. But if there are areas that come up, I've had video calls that haven't gone through and we've just called each other in FaceTime if we both have iPhones, or we've rescheduled, or there's a lot of things you can do. But just being patient with folks and being willing to troubleshoot because a lot of things can pop up. Video is a good time to, try to build the same type of in-person experience, the trust, the credibility, having conversations that are not as formal of an interview where you're really getting to know the person, obviously not asking questions that you shouldn't be asking in an interview process, but getting to know them as best you can, and encouraging them to talk about how they're working now, what they're seeing in their experiences, really helps people to let their guard down during a process, and you start to get to know them personally and what they'd be like to work with on a day-to-day basis. And the same advice that we mentioned before about over-communicating with your staff, we also encourage more frequent communication with candidates as you're trying to bring them into the mix, because there's just so many unknowns. It's nice to just hear from folks along the way, knowing what the process, what's happening. And of course, if you do get to the point where you are doing in-person interviews, making sure that you're keeping in mind any state or local government regulations about social distancing, masks, people's health. That's certainly first and foremost, and allowing candidates to perhaps decline if they're really not comfortable at that time, because you don't know what underlying health issues they may have. There may be a lot of reasons that they want to maintain a little bit more distance at this time, and so working with them. And also, you can mix it up. Sometimes you can have some team meetings, interviews, sometimes a panel, sometimes one-on-one. No one does really well with 4 or 5 hours of an interview over video. And so, chopping them up into little bits is probably a lot more digestible for folks at this point.
That's right. And I heard of I saw an interesting workaround around those interviews recently. Was there were several candidates and they were doing group interviews. And when they set them up, the way they set them up was each interview had its own login so that a candidate did not inadvertently end up in someone else's interview, because we've actually seen that happen also. But I just think that's a good workaround to make sure that you keep the process as smooth as possible. On the employee side, and when you're looking for a new opportunity, one of the things that we just wanted to put here was video logistics, and it seems like a small thing, and it seems like something that everyone here would know. But we have someone in our office who's just a master at doing this, and so he, recommends that you lift your computer up so that it sits on something like a ream of paper or two thick books, so that you can look more directly into the camera, and that you have the right lighting. And it's ironic that I would say that because the room that I'm in is kind of dark. One of the things that we all have noticed is that we're all looking into each other's living rooms, dining rooms, kitchens, and we're just like, oh, isn't that interesting? Well, that space has become an extension of you. And so one of the things is to make sure that it's clear, that it's pleasant in the back of you, so that someone, and that but it's a space that you don't get distracted in, that you end up thinking about the interview and keep looking at the back of the person and saying, I wonder what's back there. But it is just one to keep in mind, because I think that we're just not taught to do that. It's going to be a little bit choppy, I think, for a little while until we figure this all out. What's interesting is we're talking about something now where we're all pretty much in shelter in place, but we also understand that there's going to be some easing of that shelter in place. And so what is probably likely in your own experience is you will have some combination of in-person versus Zoom, and you have to be able to adjust to all of it. We've heard of a Zoom where of an in-person, excuse me, where someone came to campus, they were interviewing 6 people, but they were all 6 feet apart. Well, that's a little it's a little bit alarming or unsettling that you're now sitting in a room and you're moving around like this because everyone is so far apart from each other. But that's a reality to think about. But despite that, the way that you think about your conversation with an employer still is important, and it still requires everything that you did before and that you thought was important, plus, because now you have to worry about the space that you're in, and you have to worry about things like how formal should you be. That, again, that's a small thing, but an interview is an interview. If you were formal in person, be as formal as you would be if you're not. If you're business casual, be as business casual as if you're not. That part probably doesn't change. And again, it seems small, but there are things that will make a difference for you. Create the relationships that will get you to what you need. And by that, you don't have the space now where you're able to take people to coffee or to meet in the morning or meet in the evening after a drink, but you can stay in touch in other ways, both through Zoom and through your email, where it's appropriate through text, although we don't recommend that quite as much. But the way that opportunities will actually change, and the people who can pivot fast and understand what that means, I think will do a lot better. One of the things that we do worry about a little bit, though, frankly, is we may see the way that opportunities change, the way that access opportunities will change, but does that mean that it's now drilling in and only certain people will hear about certain opportunities? And it's one to be aware of. And I think going forward, that will have some, as Chris said, resource and equity issues as people are trying to access those opportunities, and we're aware of those. Next slide, please.
So Mary, before I dive into the employer side of this, just a quick silly, or maybe I shouldn't tell this because it's embarrassing, but having people in, sort of in your home. It was, we had a birthday over the weekend. So the other day I jumped on a firm-wide call where a whole company was there, and I started getting a bunch of texts because in the picture behind me, I had a happy birthday banner and everyone was asking me whose birthday it was. And I had to tell them that it was the dog's birthday over the weekend. And we put a banner up for her because we're bored and we were just being silly, but I forgot to take it down. And it was just one of those things. It's fine for folks
Chris,
to know, but
because somebody asked me, they said, well, whose birthday is it? And I said, well, I don't know. And I said whose birthday was for everybody in your family. And they said, oh, well, it must be the dog. So
it was the dogs. And so, and I really don't mind, but at the same time, that could be, if I was interviewing, that could be something that I wouldn't want to frame the situation with a banner in the background. And some folks don't have places where they can go and have privacy right now, especially if there's multiple adults working in the house. And, you know, if you have children or adults or pets, you know, there's just so much happening. And so being patient is really important, and, you know, for both sides, because some of those interviewers are having the same challenges as candidates. And so it can happen to all of us, that's for sure. So hopefully you've made it through the interview process successfully, and you're ready to bring a new team member into the mix. And onboarding is a new a challenge. Onboarding is a challenge sometimes for organizations anyway. But we really believe that the onboarding process actually starts with the first conversation you have with a potential candidate before they ever get the offer. Once you engage with a candidate, you're really starting to onboard them into the organization before they're even extended the offer, because all of those things are teaching them what the culture is like, how decisions are made, how things happen in terms of staying on time and timelines and schedules for the organization. There's a lot of information during that process that's being conveyed, and it all starts to inform the onboarding. And so we recommend, before, you know, having someone's first day, is having a very clear plan. We recommend 1 year, that 12 months that is well paced and builds on each step. And so you start small and build up to, by the end of the year, you know, they've had a very thorough immersion into the organization. Certainly prioritizing being flexible, and the grace and empathy that goes along with our current situation of being remote. But if this extends, or you hire someone who is always remote, definitely the patience that we've learned from this situation will apply there and be helpful. You know, keeping a clear plan and communicating with the employee as to what the plan is, as well as what is the role of the manager, what is the employee's role, and what is the role of HR. Because sometimes that can get confusing in the onboarding process. Is it orientation? Is it onboarding? And so making sure that everyone knows what they're responsible for and who they can go to is really important. And, you know, we think about it as the first day, the first week, and then a 30, 60, 90-day window, as well as, you know, sort of 6 months, 12 months. And so you sort of take it in chunks, and it could certainly go much longer, especially for, you know, the C-suite level and executive directors. It may go into 18 months by the time that you're able to make all of the introductions and connections that need to be made both internally and externally. And of course, we touched on this a little bit before, but relocation is going to be even more difficult for people to think about right now. And so there may be ways, we had talked to some of our colleagues, and folks were having employees start remote with the intention that 6 to 12 months down the road, they would be relocating. And so that they have time to get used to the position, understand the organization, and look to relocate at a later time when it was more comfortable, especially if there's families and people with children in schools and not knowing what's happening with school. I think it's a new challenge, because it's not as simple as sort of investigating the new school that the kids would be going to. Are you going to move your family somewhere, and now your children are going to be going to school in a new bedroom and have no introduction to the school? And so that could be a real challenge for parents. I mean, I'm sure it's something people would really want to think about. And so being mindful that folks have these new issues and concerns that they have to think about is important.
You know, as a new employee or a new team member, you'll also have to think about how you can be part of the onboarding process in a way that you may not have to consider before, because of the realities of perhaps not being in an office, and you have other people in the home with you in your space. You'll have to communicate what those needs are. And sometimes that can be, it feels risky because it feels as if you're being needy, but it's not. It's the reality under which we're all working. And that I think goes to the patience and the reality of the work itself. But I think, um, but I think with that understanding will help. Sorry, I was distracted by someone who had a chat. Expect onboarding to take longer, as Chris said. But at the same time, if you are the manager who is joining the organization, you'll have to onboard your team because they will have to get to know you in the same way that you are getting to know the organization. And so the one-on-ones that you would have to get to know with people, those small groups that you would get to know, that you is one that now you'll have to think about in a really thoughtful way to make sure that they get to know who their manager is. You know, I think it's interesting because there are many nonprofits. This is new to us in this space, in this sort of a social space, but global organizations and global companies have been doing this for years, and we're just catching up, and we can learn from them because they often are doing the hiring, the onboarding, the performance reviews, all of it, and they don't necessarily meet a person until a year in. But I think that there are additional resources that you can draw on and look for in terms of how you're able to do this and be effective, because it's quite likely, or it could be likely, that you join the organization, you're a manager, you have a remote team, and then you yourself have to start hiring, which is also likely, talking about the levels where many of you are. And so you'll have to do this process from the other side. And so it's interesting to keep the balance and perspective of how you yourself join the organization and how effective you can be, and what you can apply when you also in the opportunity or in the chance to bring people on. So I got a message that there are lots of questions here, and so we're just about tied up. If we could have the next slide, so that we can get to your questions.
Great.
Mm.
So we put together this virtual onboarding checklist. I don't know if virtual is even relevant because it is, but we really tried to make it as much as in person as possible. And I think that just like the interview process, that is the goal. Onboarding should be really dynamic. It shouldn't be like a strategic plan that you do and then you put it on the shelf and you don't touch it for 3 to 5 years. And then you say, oh no, we never looked at that again. What we want to do is make sure that this is a live sort of living document that you prepare for your new team member. And it starts with the offer letter, really. Once that's signed and sent back to an organization, we encourage you to send a welcome email to the new staff member before their first day. It's a good opportunity for others in the organization to also send an email and say hello and fill their inboxes with a lot of nice, welcoming messages. Certainly HR has a huge role in pre-boarding and in that first day, often in completing paperwork and benefit information. But you can send a good amount of that now before the first day, so that all of that part of it is taken care of. They have the employee handbook. They can start to understand your culture, understand your policies, and develop questions. Certainly, very important is to make sure that they have their computer before their first day, if you're supplying that, or a phone if your organization supplies a phone, but making sure they're connected through organizational email and have their tech set up, ready to go, that they know, tape a sticky note to the top of the computer. This is who you call if you have a problem, and make sure that technology, because that's what's tethering them to you and to the organization. So it's really important that they know and ask them what they need. Do they need help navigating through Zoom and backgrounds, or do they need a screen that they can put up? Like, there may be some things that you're able to provide them that helps them more comfortable, help them to be more comfortable as they're getting used to a remote work situation. And then the first day, of course, welcome them again. If you happen to be in person, that would be socially distanced welcome probably, but also making sure that the team welcomes them. You can send something in advance so that they have a company shirt or button or iPhone, one of those doohickeys that you can hold the iPhone, a pop-up. That's what we have at Campbell Company, so that they just feel that they're part of the organization, making it seem like it's in person. certainly the org chart and team list so that they can start figuring out who is who. If possible, putting bio pictures next to each team member is rather than going through the website, but something that they can reference and start to connect names and faces. It seems something silly, but when you're the new person and you're meeting 20 or 30 or 40 people in person, it's hard. So even by video, it may end up being a little bit more difficult. And then provide them with their onboarding document on that first day so that they have all their meetings set up for them. It's very organized. They know what to expect. It's ready to go. And very important to assign a coach or a mentor. Some people call it a buddy. Having a formalized mentor program is really important to successful onboarding. And at Campbell Company, we have sort of a dual mentorship where we have a peer mentor who really helps with, understanding policies and the work, but we also have sort of an outside member of another team that doesn't do the same type of work as us, who's at the same level as that person, who can just be a sounding board, who you can go to and just talk to really about the company. So you have some different options of folks to talk to. And then, of course, as the manager, setting up evaluation and review expectations, what metrics are, what their goals will eventually be, are all important in that first day and the first week, so folks can start immersing themselves into the role. And then setting those goals, like we had mentioned before, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, having ongoing check-in meetings, holding yourselves accountable for those check-in meetings is important. Otherwise, onboarding sometimes starts to fall away. And, as time goes on, sort of expanding the circle of folks that the new employee is meeting with. So you obviously start with team and close colleagues and peers, and eventually having them have conversations with all department heads or a senior person from any department is really helpful, including the CEO and any leadership that helps folks feel really engaged and welcome. I think, probably the most important piece is encouraging feedback along the way. I find that every time we do an onboarding with a new employee, I learn 5 more things that I need to apply to the next onboarding situation with the next employee. And so having that live feedback is really helpful and important.
Chris, I think we're up to questions, and we've already have one. And if you like, I can read it. Could you share some guidance on how to transition out of fundraising during this time? The person asking would like to transition from fundraising into project and program management and corporate responsibility roles. I'll take a stab.
Okay, I'm catching up, still reading the questions. Thank you.
Okay, in fact, I'll go backwards. I think the corporate social responsibility role might be the hardest one to transition into, frankly. They tend to be this small group of people, and you don't know quite who they are, and you don't know quite how you get there. Now, to program and project management, that one I think might be an easier one for now in this time, because one, start to make friends with the person who would be that manager, and second, find experiences that you have in fundraising that may be attached to certain initiatives where the skills can start to translate into how you can be a program person versus a fundraiser. Because program people really like the idea of fundraisers being with them because they can really think about the programs in a different way. They can think about them both for the content, and they can think about them strategically and how you might be able to draw support and funding for that. And so that's one that I think that you use as your platform so that you can start to talk with people about how your fundraising experience would really benefit the organization, either the one you're in or the one you're trying to go to. The next question.
Mary, do you want me to take? Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
With the absence of an in-person interview, do you have any specific interview questions that I would be able to ask of potential employers on their work culture and management style? That has been a major reason for leaving previous positions in organizations, and I want to ensure I am as proactive as possible, engaging the culture of a new potential employer.
Got it. I can take a crack at that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Marion.
I was saying that is a great question.
And it's hard, right? It can be very difficult. We don't have the magic question. I wish we did, but it's really sort of as we were saying before, like the onboarding starts during the interviewing. I would say start asking questions along the way with the interview process about how decisions are made. How does an organization make decisions? How does that manager specifically make decisions? Asking questions about how they set goals and evaluate their team, I think can be very telling. Is there a standard procedure in place, or is it, just sort of not organized? I think sometimes that helps gain insight into behavior from managers. And I would ask them what they like about managing. Some people don't like it, and some people are not good at it, and they'll admit that. And so they may be, they may be looking for strengths in the team that they're bringing on, and having an open conversation with them can be really helpful. If they're not open about it, that can be very telling too, depending on what their answers are.
And I would ask the interviewer why they're there and what attracted them to the organization. And who doesn't like a few minutes to talk about themselves? And I think you're doing two things. You're possibly building a relationship, and you're starting to understand why that person thinks that organization is for them. And I think that will begin to tell you a lot about culture overall.
That's a good suggestion. Great.
Hi, Marion and Chris. I'll share the following audience questions. Our next question is, do you have any recommended job banks to be looking at outside of the major ones, such as LinkedIn and Glassdoor?
Well, I almost never look at Glassdoor. We just have such mixed reviews. When you say major job banks, are we talking about fundraising sectors? What sectors are we talking about? Are we talking about specific content or fundraising, or what?
That wasn't specifically shared, so let's just assume fundraising.
There are the usual that we all know. There's Chronicle of Philanthropy, of course, and AFP. I mean, how could we not mention AFP in case, and AHP if it's healthcare? But I'm going back to the article. I think it might be stronger to look at the organization that you're interested in more so, and find those organizations. And that you can do through some research that in GuideStar. That will help you figure out sectors and size, and then you can always go to the website and figure out what they do. But I think I might take a more targeted approach than we've taken historically in the past. And just to say, we'll be doing something very similar.
Mm-hmm. I think LinkedIn is probably the biggest one where we see the most postings. Certainly Chronicle of Philanthropy and AFP, both the national, and if we're doing work in certain cities, these are chapters. Idealist is another one. And we also will look at sort of the foundation sites. It really varies. And I think Marion's on the right track when she says, look at the organization. Spending the time networking is just as important, if not more important, than having so many sites. I think looking for a job is like a full-time gig a lot. There's just so much information out there, and so try to make it a little easier on yourself and see who that you could connect to someone within the organization.
Great. I next want to share an audience member's story and a related question. I decided in February to leave my role on June 30th and couldn't have known that the job market would freeze. The two very promising leads I had are now in hiring freezes. My best talents are in major gift work, although I'm currently a director of development now. I would really like to lead a major gift program for a while before I return to a director role. I need more professional development and marketing and communications before I do. I'm nervous about the major gift jobs that are currently out there. Do you anticipate organizations to freeze most major gift officer and major gift director searches for the next 3 to 6 months? I'm very nervous.
I don't, because it's still the center of fundraising. But I also think there's a reality that goes along with that, is that there will be more pressure to produce faster. And even though we all know that fundraising has a cycle, and for the most part, you don't do well trying to break that cycle, I do think there'll be more pressure. But I think there will be opportunities. Partly because organizations that are letting go of staff are letting go of staff that they believe are not as productive in many cases.
And I think I agree with Marian, certainly, and the major gifts and individual giving side is so important, especially with the events that we've seen cancel. And so that, sort of is really putting a big hit on part of the team. Then those individual gifts become even more important. So I think there will be opportunities. And sorry, I'm thinking about it a little bit. I might be overthinking it, but I also want to say that we're either Marian or I are happy to connect with this person individually after, because it may just be like hearing specifics might be really helpful, and also thinking about sort of what sector you may want to focus on, or where there may be a larger organization with it could technically be a lateral move, but to give opportunities with individual gifts. So that you can get that development that you need.
One of the things, if it's possible to find out, is to see how developed portfolios are, because I think there will be increased pressure. And if you walk into an organization and you're handed a portfolio and only 20 are active, you've kind of cut yourself off at the pass. In better times, you would have more time to develop that, but you won't now. You just won't.
Thank you. Our next question is, what do you think about job seekers proactively reaching out to organizations where they'd like to work even if a job is not advertised?
Well, I personally like that. I think, there's a lot of organizations that have on their website, we're not hiring right now, but if you'd like to consider, be considered to submit your resume. And I always encourage folks to do that. I can tell you 100% certainty, we go to our database at Campbell Company all the time. And so we may not have a search that matches, but we do enter every candidate that we receive. And when we are looking to make hires for our clients and internally for Campbell Company, we definitely look through our database. The tricky part about it is that, technology is good for keeping track of those resumes. Technology is not always the best at remembering remarkable conversations you've had with someone and, making that first impression. And so I think if you reach out appropriately to the organization and ask to have your name submitted, I think that's a positive thing. You just can't check in too often.
And I have never known of a situation where if someone was absolutely stellar, that the hiring manager wasn't at least willing to have a conversation with their hiring manager. It may not pan out for you now, but you'll be remembered. So yes, I'm with Chris. Go for it. Because remember earlier we said we think that it's going to be more how you know the organization, and have you been following them, and who are your networks?
Mm-hmm. Great. And I would add, I'm sorry, Emily, if I could just add really quick, connecting on LinkedIn to those people, like building your LinkedIn network. Folks it's for some reason we get a lot of response, even quick emails on LinkedIn. And so that's a good way to at least make an introduction to.
Which is a good time for me to put a plug in and say, make sure that your LinkedIn profile matches what your resume says.
Great. Our next question is, are organizations asking about or actively seeking interim development support while they figure out their budgets post-pandemic?
I'm not sure I know. That's a good question.
We have enough data yet to know that. Partly because we're organizations, we think, would be trying to figure out what are going to be the best uses of their resources if they're reduced. Ask us that question.
I agree. And I think we could follow up on that question by talking to some of our colleagues on the fundraising team. They may have better insight because they're inside more organizations on a more regular basis to know that. So we can follow up on that one, Emily.
Great. Our next question is, I relocated to the DMV area last year. I'm new to the area, but I've served in fundraising for 22 years. What job search suggestions do you have for a seasoned fundraiser in a new geographical area?
Well, obviously, you're following AFP. That's what we would recommend. That's a big one. Another, looking into other networking groups that are available in the area. That may be smaller, that may be, sort of even volunteer based. I think those can be really helpful and start making connections that way.
Yeah, I was going to suggest board service if you have time, volunteer opportunities.
There's also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Emily. The third one, I jumped in just a little bit late. But also, I would look at other search firms that are located in the area, and that's when you can make introductions to local recruiters. Marion and I like it when people reach out to us and introduce themselves, and we understand, how you're building that network. And there are a lot of nonprofit recruiters that are active, and so that's another way and another path that you could take looking for opportunities and building your network.
Yes, agreed. Emily,
so we have time for one last question. If we weren't able to answer your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. Our last question is, do you have any tips or insights on preparing to ask for a promotion and greater responsibility during these times?
Timing's going to be key on that one. But it doesn't mean that the past should define part of the future for you. So even if it's not possible to have a promotion or more money now, you certainly should have the conversation. So, say based on performance last year, and this has happened, and I've done this, and I'd like to have a conversation about what my future looks like here. And again, I think it's a perfectly appropriate conversation, because ideally you're not asking for something that you haven't already earned. And I think every manager would expect, a manager would expect that.
I would agree. And hopefully some are listening to the part where we said, the retention right now is key. It's a really good time to be having those conversations with your top employees because there is so much uncertainty.
That's right. mean, unless there are some really, really significant structural changes, organizations and institutions really do want to keep who they believe are their good performers, because they need them to be able to plan the future. Well, I'm sorry we don't have time for more questions, but it's been fun to be here.
Yes, thank you all for sharing your questions and experiences with us.
Well, Chris, Marion, thank you. I feel like the job search, the hiring during hiring practices generally, or onboarding could be in and of themselves a dedicated topic for a webinar, and you both have very expertly provided us the most pertinent key points for all three of those. So to give our audience the biggest picture of how to manage through both the job search and hiring process during a very strange, ever-changing time. So thank you. We really appreciate this webinar. So for all of you, the rest of you, the AFP DC has a COVID-19 page that lives off of our main page, afpdc.org. This recording, as well as other COVID-19 resources that we've created, both webinars and resources, in fact, a resource guide that Campbell and Company have created themselves, are also living there. So you will be able to find the recording there. And these are a couple of our upcoming events. Our calendar is updated on a regular basis, and as we are navigating through, our calendar is changing a little bit to be more reflective of the topics that we know are the most relevant for you as our members and audience right now. So stay tuned on that page for the most up-to-date. We do have a couple other ways to connect with us, both through social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Flickr, Facebook. So you're welcome to continue the conversation there. And finally, you know, this is our AFP, whether it's here at the DC chapter or globally. And it is a wonderful opportunity to be able to give back and support our sector and our profession. So the Be the Cause campaign does that through the AFP Foundation. We as a chapter contribute, and many of our members also contribute, and so we encourage you to be thinking about supporting this way of giving back, which provides funding for research, funding for skills building, capacity, leadership development that the foundation is putting in place, as well as opportunities for just professional growth of our sector. So Be the Cause is something you'll hear about from us as a chapter, both online and through print mail, and we are grateful for your consideration of supporting that. And with that, I think we can conclude today. Thank you again, Chris and Marion and the rest of the Campbell and Company team, and we wish you all the best and hope that you all stay safe and well.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.